Welcome to BayChi's July meeting. This is our program that happens monthly on the second Tuesday of the month. And today's talk, as you can see, is Beyond Interaction, Human-Computer Machine Teaming. Carol Smith from Carnegie Mellon joins us, and we'll hear more about that later. We give her at least an hour or something to talk. Whenever she's done, we ask for questions from you. And in fact, she is asked to allow people to ask questions however they like with the chat or other ways while she's speaking as well. So Chi is a special interest group of the Association for Computing Machinery, big organization with 75,000 members. Its biggest conference is SIGGRAPH, and its second biggest is Chi. We've been meeting as a group here in the Bay Area since 1989, and we just want to say take a moment to say a few things about it. You can join. It's only $20 a year. It's a community with monthly meetings, a newsletter, and we will be working on updating our job bank and consultants list for you in the next month or two. We have birds of a feather meetings. So, for example, right now, Edwin Lee is running a meeting. It'll occur, second one will occur next week, and it is a meeting about careers in Chi. I'm considering starting a birds of a feather that people can come and visit sometimes to talk about their brand, their computer human interface brand. Maybe if they're trying to prepare talks or writing or doing research or want to do mentoring in the Chi area, we can have a discussion about that. I've enjoyed doing that kind of thing a lot. We have a new web page that is coming. We spent the last 6 months, Steve Williams, getting it set up so that at least we are using a new service that isn't going away. And the next month, we are going to have a different speaker, and that speaker will be Ted Nelson. He is one of the people that claims to have invented hypertext. And he wrote a book, Dream Machines, in 1960s. He's written a book, even last year, he wrote another book. And he's a fellow at the Internet Archive, which you can look up. The Internet Archive is a very exciting place. But anyway, I look forward to that talk next month. And we have some very exciting talks scheduled for the next few months, including the inventor of Atari, the first person to make video games, will be speaking. This is a volunteer organization, and please contact anybody in the organization by contacting volunteer@baychi.org, and we will try to get you involved as you would like in maybe publishing some of the beautiful talks as videos that we've made, or helping work on the website with Steve Williams. There's a lot of things that one can do, and if you're interested, it's a way of making friends in this community. We have a group that meets on Thursdays of the first of the month. Anybody's welcome to come to it. It's really the place where we talk about running of this organization. And it's at 7:30. You'll find it on our BayChi calendar, which is probably one of the places you could have found this talk too. So baychi.org is a place where you can find what's going on. Without further ado, I want to let my colleague Smitha, or Nancy, introduce our speaker of the evening.
Thanks, Ted. Smitha, you want to go ahead and introduce Carol, because you've been doing all the organizing for this.
Yes. Carol Smith, who's our speaker today, is a research scientist in human-machine interaction at CMU, or Carnegie Mellon, and also an adjunct instructor for CMU's Human-Computer Interaction Institute. She's been focusing on UX research for the last 20 years, as well as design. She's done everything from managing international design teams, technical teams, and also working on integrating ethics to improve experiences with AI systems. You may have heard some of her work with IBM Watson, with Uber, self-driving vehicle experiences. She's, of course, internationally recognized in UX, spoken over, 150 events all over the world. And so we're glad to have you here today, Carol. With that, the stage is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. And we'll be using these closed captions. Hopefully they will work for everyone. Please feel free to interrupt me if you have questions. I will not notice the chat, so hopefully someone will bring that up. And I'm happy to make this more of a discussion than just me talking. But the topic, as was already mentioned, is beyond interaction, human-machine teaming. And the focus really is trying to help you to think about the challenges that you're facing in creating these systems and how to best start the difficult conversations that are really necessary and always have been in software, but now are becoming even more obvious because AI systems are so complex and take in so much data. So a quick bit about the copyright, and I want to acknowledge the land that I speak on. So I am in
with monthly meetings, a newsletter, and we will be working on,
sorry, hang on. Someone is playing. There we go. Okay. A little bit of a background there. Okay, so I want to acknowledge the land that I speak on. I am on the land of the Monongahela, the Adena, and the Hopewell Nations, the Seneca, the Lenape, and Shawnee lands, Osage, Delaware, and Iroquois lands. And this is important because it's important to acknowledge where we come from. And this area is now known as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Sorry. There we go. So what I'm going to be talking about a lot today is based on work I've been doing for the past 5 or 6 years, as well as work that I've been doing specifically here at Carnegie Mellon University, working on really trying to define AI engineering more clearly for everyone, and also looking more at the challenges that are inherent with these more complex systems. So we have just recently done some white papers on particularly human-centered AI and other topics within the world of AI engineering. And what we've determined is that obviously these systems need to be designed to work with and for people. And that includes not only obviously an effective implementation, a safe and secure environment, a system that is robust, and that is able to be scalable. Those are some of the aspects of AI engineering that we really value, but also that we're looking at minimizing any unintended consequences, that we're really examining the breadth and scope and reach of these systems and the potential harm that could come with them. And so we want to look at 3 areas of human-centered AI, and that's what I'll be talking about today and framing some of the content around understanding the context of use, which is very familiar to those in the audience who have been practicing in this field for a long time, designing for human-machine teaming and some of the specific areas of interest in that particular environment, and also engaging in critical oversight. And this is really where the work to ask more critical questions, to really provoke deep thought, to be more creative, to be more speculative is so important. So understanding context of use. Human-machine teaming. This is, if you're not familiar with this term, it is really about collaboration between humans and machines. So things that we've always done with computers, or at least the past 30 plus years. This is a step beyond that. So this is not just using a tool, but truly working with that system to achieve a goal. So it is a different situation than what we're used to, where we might type in a document, we might use a tool like Figma to create a wireframe, we might use a tool like Mural or Miro to share and create together. This is really much more interactive, much more collaborative in nature. It's about taking large amounts of information typically and complex interactions typically and exchanging information. And through this, we potentially do form a relationship with the machine. The machine forms a relationship with us and vice versa. We're sharing knowledge and information, exchanging it, and ideally truly building on each other's skills. So the machine being able to calculate and do various manipulations of data and review content at a much faster rate than a human can, and the human being able to see the meaning in the work, to really understand what is going on, to understand the broader context, to see problems within the system that the AI system is not capable of understanding or knowing. And so this is early purposeful work. And of course, some of this may sound familiar if you were in the talk by Ben Schneiderman a couple weeks ago. And I, of course, am building on some of the work that he's done as well. There's just been a lot of work recently in this area, and it's so great to see so many people talking about these issues. So the first thing to really look at is this an AI-friendly challenge? Is this really something that's appropriate for an AI system? I used to joke many years ago that, oh, of course, there's an app for that. That was, when everybody was making apps for everything. Now it's, is there an AI for that? Has become the new thing. People are really wanting to make sure that they've got AI in everything. And it's not always appropriate. And it's something that needs to be examined pretty deeply. Really understanding who are you building it for, what are their needs, typical stuff that we do in the UX world. What kind of improvements are we expecting? Is this new system truly going to be able to perform better than the current system? And along with that, what is our return on investment? How much time and money is it going to take to build a system that is more effective than the current system? Often that simple question changes the subject and the conversation very quickly, because the investment that needs to be made in an AI system to get it up and running and then to continue to maintain it is not insignificant. It is a big change in how you do business. And while some specific jobs, tasks may be replaced, others will be needed, and some of those new ones may be more expensive and longer term. So thinking about all of these different things and how are we going to measure those improvements and understand what is happening with the system. And of course, thinking through the benefits and risks, which is what I'll talk a lot about today. So one of the aspects I want to focus on today also is just how collaborative this work is. During a human-machine teaming activity or during an event, the time that is needed for that particular experience, that length of time during which those interactions are going to occur, is going to vary. But those variables, the way that time changes and the urgency, the way the information is being exchanged between the systems, that is the key to really making a good system. So really having a strong understanding of, is this a situation where they're very short and hectic interactions and decisions need to be made very quickly, but we still need to be able to have the system and the human understanding each other? How are we going to manage that in a way that is not overwhelming to the human? If they're longer and more iterative, and the human that's interacting with the system is going to do some work in the system and then go do something else, and then they're going to come back to the system and then they're going to go do something else. How do we keep them informed of what the system has learned or changed about the information? How do we bring the information that the human has gained through other conversations, through other articles they've read outside of this particular system? How do we bring that together? How do we really make both of them have a shared experience with that knowledge? And then thinking about how those interactions need to change because of all of this. Dwayne Degler and I talked about this a couple of months ago at the IA conference, and you're welcome to view the video. I'm not going to get too much into this, but this is an important aspect of all of this work, is really thinking about how we communicate how we negotiate, how humans and machines are negotiating and giving and taking and working together in that collaboration, and then the coordination that needs to occur. So if the AI system, if it's their turn, how does the human know? How does the AI system know that the human is now taking the lead, or is now providing more information, or is contributing more? And how do you balance those two? So these systems can be quite complex and time needs to be taken to really think through this kind of aspect of the interaction. So thinking about the context of use from the perspective of not just the UX work that we typically do, but also from an AI perspective, we really need to think about what is the desired outcome. So when the system is working well, what are the human's needs? How is the system meeting it? What are the human factors as well as the contextual factors that need to be considered and that will affect that outcome? And then considering, again, how do the human and the AI really understand when a shift in context has occurred? How do they understand or how do they maintain the clarity around their operational intent? What they are doing and what they intend to do? And then how do these systems adapt and evolve, the human and the machine, based on the dynamic context that they're in? So whatever is occurring, there could be external factors or factors within the system, or the human has had a conversation with someone and now more information is available and that changes the situation. So there are lots of more detailed nuances that we need to consider with these systems. So an example for semi-autonomous vehicles, thinking about the potential factors that may affect the system and the partnership there, the collaboration. So certainly driver behavior. If you think about your driving, there are probably days when you drive faster than other days. There are probably days where you pay more attention than others. How should the system respond to that? How should the system, how aware should the system be of your current state? What about weather changes? In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, we've been having enormous storms coming through almost every other day. And most self-driving semi-autonomous vehicles can't manage that. Their systems literally will not be able to see the road or anything else because of that. So how does that impact how you transition between the human and the system? Street painting changes. My street recently received the zebra stripe, which has not been announced anywhere, and there's no signage to indicate what it means, but it's there. So if a self-driving vehicle, a semi-autonomous vehicle had been going down that street every single day, and then all of a sudden the paint changes, what happens? How does the vehicle respond? How does the vehicle convey potentially indecisiveness, uncertainty? How do those pieces of information get conveyed back to the human? If you want to change your desired route, how do you do that? Highway versus city driving, lots of variables to consider there. And then of course, emergent situations where there isn't enough time to really have a dialogue, to really have any communication, and where the urgency is immediate and needs to be dealt with without a lot of thought put into it. So dealing with all those variables is really important in that particular situation. And another example is thinking about decision-making with regard to medical treatment. So a very different topic, but the factors also need to be considered in a very, very careful way. So the potential factors might be how much information is already known about the patient, about the condition, about the stage of their disease, whatever information there is, what is known, what is unknown, what tests haven't been done yet. What are the specifics that patient has that might influence their treatment? Perhaps they aren't able to return for additional treatment. How do you manage that situation? Their insurance status, all kinds of different pieces that are going to be very different from patient to patient and potentially significant depending on the situation. And again, thinking about the changes over time. If the person who is using the AI system to help with determining the treatment learns new information, so they do run those tests, they do receive more information, how does that get delivered to the system, to the AI system? How do they communicate about that information? How do they negotiate about that treatment? The human should always be making that decision, particularly in life or death situations with medicine and with other situations. But the indications that the system might give may be very different depending on that information. So really thinking through that piece, the communication, negotiation, coordination, all of that is really important. So the challenges for this area, for really thinking about the context, are getting the time and budget for UX research. Like, this is always our #1 problem, unfortunately. Using the patterns that we have wisely. So thinking about the work that has already been done in design and with the patterns that exist, and how can we really use those in ways that are going to benefit the user. Also thinking about how can we make sure that we're really making the right choices with that. We don't want to use a pattern simply to use it, but rather, is this really the right opportunity to use that? And thinking about how to demystify AI. There's still a lot of confusion and fear and frustration around AI systems, and how can we really work to help other people that we're working with understand both the limitations and the benefits of these systems and how they can work together. There's, of course, always the challenge of balancing cognitive load for humans. We were having a conversation right before this presentation about how physically humans really haven't changed that much in 1,000 years. We're the same. We change a little bit over the centuries, but basically we're the same. We're not able to do much more than we could a long time ago. And given that, we know that when we're stressed, when we're tired, when we have been altered in some way from having a alcoholic drink or whatever it is, we behave differently. And really paying attention to how that might change, how the system needs to respond is very important. And then understand what is different with regard to those time cycles. So thinking about those discriminate interactions within a moment in time, and how that is going to need to affect the interaction, and then how that interaction is going to obviously change the next interaction, and thinking about those time cycles through clear communication, negotiation, and coordination. And I did see a question pop up. I can read it actually. It says,
I'm not sure if there's a question.
Nope, it was not. Okay.
It's a
Okay. Excellent. So moving on to the next topic of designing for human machine teaming. How do we do this work? How do we really think about when they're working together? If we understand how to manage that context, how to really work with that piece, how do we then help people to actually partner? What kind of tools and processes and practices can we put together? So the first real consideration is that interdependence. Humans are coming with all of our experiences, all of our biases, all of our frustrations, whatever it is that we're coming with. We're bringing all of that to this situation, and we need to find ways to balance our strengths and our weaknesses with the system. And is that something that can be done? Is the AI system able to do that? When people are interacting with these systems, they need to understand that not necessarily at a level where they know which algorithms have been used or know how the system was constructed specifically, but having enough awareness and knowledge to really understand at a level that is appropriate. So thinking about the types of content that have been used to build the system and how it was built and what purpose it was built for is important, as well as that information influencing how much trust they give to the system. We don't want systems that are trusted without any questioning at any time. We definitely want people to feel not only empowered to question, but that they should be questioning these systems, that they shouldn't have a level of trust that is beyond reproach. It's just a computer. And how do we remind them of that? How do we help them to understand that this system is doing the best it can given what it has, but it is a computer. It is only as smart as the information we've given it. It is only aware of the context we've made it aware of, and it can only control the information that we've given it to control of. So really thinking about how we design the system to recognize boundaries and unfamiliar scenarios so that it can alert the individual who's using it that this is something new, this is something I'm uncertain about, this is something that is outside of the awareness of this AI system. And also provide transparency with regard to those limitations so that the system really is clear and transparent to the user in a way that, again, that is appropriate for their use. So we hopefully all know that AI is not sentient or unknowable. You probably have heard that these systems, no one knows how they really work. It's unclear. The way that these systems are described, unfortunately, is lazy and unhelpful. And no one should be using or buying or maintaining any important system that is indecipherable. That's irresponsible and will only end badly. So we need to make sure that we have the ability to control and to monitor the systems and to understand them, again, at a reasonable level, and that the people who are maintaining them also understand how the system works and that they have the ability to control them and to make the changes that are needed to the system when they are needed. Sentience, if you're not familiar with that term, is the idea that humans, robots typically, are going to imbue the thoughts and feelings very similar to a human and approach the world in the way that humans do. I am not a fan of this work, but it is something that some people really aspire to have come to fruition. And it's a different topic, but happy to talk about in the discussion time later. And I haven't seen any questions, so I'm going to keep going. So we need to speculate. Speculation keeps people safe. The work of being imaginative, being curious, being creative in the way that we think about the potential things that can occur with these systems helps to keep people safe. And so how we do that for human machine teaming is really by activating curiosity. So using UX research methods and activities that help people to really think about the work that they're doing, the work that they are creating with these AI systems. One method is abusability testing that was coined by Dan Brown. Another is Black Mirror episodes. Casey Feisler talks about this. Flip it to test it is an old method of just looking at a statement or a scenario and changing who the individuals are and seeing if that is different or feels weird. And if it does, then there's a problem. Implicit association test is an online test that you can take to really get to where you understand at least what your biases might be. And if you have your whole team take it, then everyone can be a little bit more aware of their biases. So all these are just some different existing methods that people can use to begin to be more speculative about both the system misuse and abuse, also the benefits, which is an important exercise too, is thinking about the ways that this new system might actually be better and be helpful to people. But particularly, we want to make sure that we pay attention to any unintended or unwanted consequences of the systems that we're using. And so somebody asked, do I like the AI is transcribing for me? And yeah, it's mostly pretty accurate. I'm pretty happy with it. It's the best we have for today. And I like using AI when it's beneficial. And this is definitely more beneficial than not having any transcription. We can always do better. So another idea is to really think about the ways to help our team members to become more engaged in this work. This is hard. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, but really for a lot of people, this is really hard. So helping people, rewarding them for finding ethics bugs really makes it a little bit more engaging and more fun. And that's what we want. We want people to engage in this work in a way that is enjoyable. It can be a little depressing, but we want to keep it as lighthearted and engaging and fun as we can so that people are doing this work and doing more and more of it. Ayanna Howard is a professor in Georgia, I believe, and she talked about rewarding team members for the ethics bugs. So this work is all about conversations. It's really digging deeply into the work by talking to the rest of the team and really getting everyone to talk about the topics that we find uncomfortable typically. And those include, what do we value? Who could be hurt by the system? What lines we do not want our AI system to cross? How we are shifting power. It's one of my favorite ones. Really thinking about who is gaining and who is potentially losing power by using the system, by creating the system. And then thinking really, how are we going to track our progress? How do we know that what we've built attains the goals that we meant it to, and that it truly is making an improvement in the situation for the people that we intend it to. So as I mentioned, this is really uncomfortable work, even for those of us here at this session today. This might be topics that we've never talked about before. Most people doing technical work have not taken a class in philosophy. They have not talked about ethics before, and we need to be, unfortunately, uncomfortable. We just need to get to the point where that is not something that we look for, and that we really appreciate these difficult conversations and dig into the work to make better software, to make better AI systems. So one of the biggest steps to getting to this work, oh, I saw a question.
Yes, there is a question.
Okay.
Leonardo, do you want to unmute and ask directly?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe I can just read what I wrote. So the question I have is, how do you think linguists particularly are currently involved in contributing to solving issues in machine-human cooperation, particularly given the fact that human languages are quite messy and complex and ambiguous, but artificial languages are not. They're very explicit.
Yeah, so that is an area that is starting to improve. There are more linguists who are starting to work with these systems, particularly, unfortunately, because there have been so many failures. So many of the systems that you might have in your home, smart speakers and other systems like that, do not do well with non-North American English accents. So if you have a Southern American, from the Southern states accent, or if you have a deeper accent from really anywhere else, many of these systems will not recognize your language pattern. It won't pick up on that. So they are starting to partner more specifically for language, and much like the transcription system, it works well for me. It may not work well for a lot of people on the call. And that's something that really needs to be considered. Not so much necessarily, and I'm not sure if you were talking about like using that type of thought in the code itself, but it's very important when it comes to the data that these systems are using. If you're using voice, people's voices, or if you're using even typed information or print information, hand printed, that will be imbued with that natural language. And the system may really misunderstand the meaning if it's not familiar with that dialect, with that particular way of speaking. So it's a big area.
So, Carol, let me just set a little context here, because what you didn't know, I don't think, and probably other people on the call don't know, is that this is, during this month, we are hosted, not we, Bakai, but we, another organization that I'm part of, is hosting a full month intensive for students and faculty in linguistics to learn about careers outside of the academy. And so you may get more questions about linguistics and linguists.
Excellent. And it is not my area of expertise, so I might turn this right back to you. Excellent. Right. So one of the first steps in doing this work is I believe strongly in adopting technology ethics. It's a wonderful way for everyone to harmonize around particular set of ethics. So ideally, we want very diverse teams, people with lots of different backgrounds, diverse with regard to the way they think, to their education, diverse with regard to their particular focus within technology. But when we all come together, we also need to all agree on what we're building, why we're building it, and the ethics around that. And this also can help to balance the pace of change. So industry pressure is often to build something quick and get it out there. Whereas with these particular systems, we do need to take a little bit more time. We really do need to pause and understand the implications much more fully. And if everyone is agreed upon this set of ethics, of shared ethics, then they will, by default, need to consider them in the work. And it also, my favorite part about that is it really gives explicit permission to really question the work, to explore the breadth of the implications and to have these difficult conversations. There are many, many, many flavors of technology ethics out there. My favorite is the Montreal Declaration for Responsible AI because it's extremely broad and covers almost any use case you might have or scenarios you might be dealing with. But there are many, many others. Some of them have very vague statements that are unhelpful, and some of them have very specific statements that are more helpful towards actually building the system. So while they're not necessarily going to tell you how to build the system, they will at least give you guidance as far as how to make those difficult decisions and trade-offs between one set of benefits and a set of risks, and really try to have that conversation and make a decision versus defaulting to a potential outcome that you did not expect. So part of this is also using tools that are available. One of those is this checklist and agreement that I developed in 2019 to really help people to think through and develop those conversations. This isn't meant to be literally a checklist, but rather a way to have conversations and to make sure that those conversations are being had. And it helps, again, between those vaguer statements of do no harm, which in many of our areas may not be possible. You know, you're at least going to waste a cup or piece of paper. Something will happen that is harmful on some level, and making the right choice or making the best choice that you can is really important. And being able to have a conversation about the technology and how it's being used is really important. So these help you to reduce risk and unwanted bias and really help you to inspect and mitigate the work as you're doing it and plan for scenarios that you have thought about and then be more prepared. Unfortunately, if something does go wrong, you at least have a way to deal with that situation instead of watching it unfold.
Could you,
with a
can
large
you read,
audience. Yeah,
can
go
you
ahead.
read a couple of those little items because they're kind of hard to see on the slide?
Yes, they are hard to see. So one of them is we work speculatively to identify the full range of risks and benefits. And I'll get into
Okay.
these in a little bit as well. But harmful, malicious use and consequences, as well as good, beneficial use and consequences. So really thinking about that broad area. What is this thing? And these can be used to populate your backlog if you're working with a backlog. Oh, we haven't done that yet. We need to do that. So this really is meant to help structure that workflow and make sure that you and the team are really thinking through the various aspects of the systems that you're building. Okay.
Thanks.
This is based on the checklist came from this framework, and I'll get into each of these areas to describe them a little bit more. But accountable to humans, cognizant of speculative risks and benefits, respectful and secure, and honest and usable. And I'll use a scenario to help frame these as well. But again, definitely keep asking me questions. So the scenario I'm going to use is WriteStaff. It's this AI shift scheduling system. So the scenario is a situation where there's store managers who work in fast food restaurants, and they are unfortunately often scheduling their friends or people who are easy to schedule for the best shifts. They're giving the same people the longer hours, and so those people are getting benefits. Well, in the US anyway, the people who don't get to a certain number of hours don't get any benefits, and you can imagine the harm and the difference between the two can be rather large. So the goals of WriteStaff are to make faster staffing decisions and scheduling, so that relieves the manager from that task, but also to reduce the bias of shift selection, which is not an easy task, but the thinking here is that maybe the system will be able to remove the bias that the store managers have about who to schedule and when. So with regard to accountable to humans, we want to ensure that humans have ultimate control, that they are able to monitor and control risk, and that a human is always responsible for any final decisions. And when I say responsible, that's ultimately responsible. So the system may do some things, but somehow a human needs to be able to either interdict or do some activity to potentially change or adjust that system. So this is with regard certainly to a person's life, their quality of life, their health, and their reputation, and any other really irreversible final type decisions that could be involved in an AI system. And part of this is, if you've watched any sci-fi ever, the ability to unplug the machines, like build that in. That's not that hard. You just need to think a little bit and do the work. And so with all these systems, making sure that they truly are systems that humans have control over, that the human can become involved, can stop the system, can literally turn it off if needed, to be exactly, Dave, I cannot do that. Yeah, come on. What kind of a horrible design is that? So really, Gray Booch talks about this in the TED Talk he did a number of years ago. And it's just a great point to just make sure that we really are keeping the humans in the loop, not only in the loop, but in charge of the loop and able to manage that. So these significant decisions that the AI system makes, though, need to be explained in a way that is human understandable, able to be overridden, and appealable and reversible. So there's GDPR in Europe. One of the statements is that if a decision is made by an automated system, it can be appealed to a human. It's not a perfect rule, but it at least gets at this point that if the system is making automated decisions, humans should be able to reconsider and to potentially override that decision. And so with WriteStaff, that system I was talking about, the manager should be able to reschedule people if needed. So if somebody all of a sudden needs to take the afternoon off, the manager should be able to just do that. That should be a consideration in the design of the system. So those responsibilities and limitations also need to be explicit. And so the human is going to have some limitations, obviously, and the AI system does too. And with the WriteStaff, we want to know who's in charge, who has the responsibility, what is the communication, negotiation, coordination, who's doing what at a given time. So with regard to picking employees to schedule, with regard to defining the shifts, how long they are, when they are, and how or who is going to work on integrating new information. So if there's new sick time that needs to be put in the system or somebody resigns, how is that going to be managed? Who's going to manage that? And those decisions need to be made well before, obviously, a human is interacting with the system, but they also need to be explicit to the person who's using the system so that they understand when and how the system is doing the work it's doing. Abusability testing that I mentioned earlier is the really using the worst case, not necessarily the worst case, but some of the ways that the system could be abused and misused. So an example that you could run through an abusability study is thinking about adding a feature that would enable right staff to turn itself off, and thinking about what the limits are of that functionality. When can it do that? When might it not be allowed to do that? How would it communicate about that? How could it be misused and abused itself, in that, you know, if somebody doesn't like their shifts, can they just unplug the machine and all of a sudden they don't have that shift anymore? That would be a bad design. What are the implications and risks of this particular feature? So that's an example of an exercise that can be done to really break down what it is that's being built and what the implications are.
Sorry, can I ask something?
Sure.
Can we go back to that one, the previous one? So in this, can you give us some examples, more examples about the second bullet point? I guess for us linguists, you know, communication problems are of special interest for us.
Yeah, and it depends. So it may be, certainly if the system is off, that needs to be conveyed in some way to the person who would be using the system. And if the system has turned itself off and back on, if that's an added piece, you know, the rationale for that, what happened, maybe there's a report that can be displayed to them. It's going to be different depending on what needs to be communicated and how, but that communication is the important piece, that the person using the system understands what has occurred, that they have an understanding of why it happened, what the system did, and what potentially what the series of events were to lead it to that point. It's really going to depend very much, and this is a pretend scenario, so I haven't honestly thought that far through, but just determining when often is important. So we've all had those pop-ups on our machine that, oh, guess what? It's going to restart. Right now, really, while I'm doing this work? You know, thinking about the appropriateness of when the system is going to do that would be very helpful if it knows ahead of time, and how much time is given and those kinds of things. Is it by an email or text or just on the screen? Does that help?
Yep. Yes,
Okay.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, did I skip? No, okay. So the second area is being cognizant of speculative risks and benefits. So this is where we think about what's the bad things, the harmful and malicious use that can be done with or to the system, and then what are the good and beneficial uses and those unintended, unwanted consequences. One example I often use is thinking about the smart temperature thermostats that people might have in their homes. Those were actually being used in as a form of abuse. The person in the home that had a Nest would be harassed by someone outside the home because they had access to the temperature gauge. And so the person with the access could make the home unbearably warm or uncomfortably cold. And the human who lived in the home was just subject to this abuse. And that's an example where the people who designed the system had not been speculative enough. They had not thought about abuse scenarios and likely didn't have a diverse enough team to be able to think about that. That's the added benefit of having people with very different backgrounds. You're going to get a much more creative thought process about the ways the system can be abused. So one additional way is, of course, conducting the UX research we need to, but doing these types of activities. This is a screenshot of the abusability study workshop I participated in a number of years ago. And the work to be done should be very broad at first in these activities, really thinking outside of personal experiences about really some of the worst types of experiences is important, particularly for people who are in frequently marginalized groups. So those groups are even more likely to be harmed by a system, by a new system, or a system that is using a broad set of data that perhaps hasn't been brought together in quite this way before, that might have the ability to put enough information together to identify them in a way that is unsafe. It might open up their personal information in a way that they're not comfortable with. Lots and lots of bad things can happen. So really thinking about the worst case, one way to do that is through a Black Mirror episode I mentioned earlier, where you, if you're familiar with the show, it's a dystopian TV show that was on TV. I believe they still actually are running it. It's excellent. If you haven't seen it, highly recommend it. And really what you do here is think about the just way out there worst case scenario, because that can help you to do that mitigation planning and to do the communication planning that I was talking about a minute ago. How do we communicate this to whom? How how urgent is that communication? Who should receive that communication? And really starting to think through those kinds of pieces through these types of exercises. So a Black Mirror episode for Right staff might be that Right staff begins prioritizing people with easy schedules. Guess what? It's repeating the patterns that are there. The managers would, of course, approve those schedules, and that would reinforce the bias. And so the people who were previously discriminated against are still discriminated against. And not only are they being discriminated against still, they're now programmatically being discriminated against. So the bias that was in the system that the people were doing was at least not consistent. But now it's extremely consistent. The pattern has been further,
Perpetuated.
Yeah, to an even broader extent. And so the harm that was there is now even worse. And I'm sure you can imagine some other ones, but this is the type of activity you want to do so that you can put in some prevention measures potentially, so that you can have a method of checking to make sure that it is not continuing to do the same harm that was done before. And a lot of this does have to be done manually. Unfortunately, a lot of the checks on AI systems do need to be done in a relatively manual way. And it's important to have humans really paying attention to and observing these systems throughout their entire life cycle. So being speculative and creating those plans, the communication and mitigation plans, and thinking about how the system is going to report, if the system can report itself, how a human could report it, who would they report it to, how can the system be turned off, who can turn it off, who is aware of the situation, and then what are the consequences? Once the system turns off, if we turn off the Right staff system, how are they going to be able to schedule now? Are they back to paper and pencil? What is the backup situation? Or can you revert to a previous version? What's that process like? And how available is that system to be brought back online relatively quickly to continue the work? The third area is respectful and secure. And this is about the values of humanity, ethics, equity, fairness, accessibility, diversity, and inclusion. And this is about respecting privacy and data rights. We only should be collecting as much information as we need and no more. And trying to instill that in the team is extremely important too. And reducing the amount of data we have that we're responsible for will help to really protect people in a significant way. Making the system robust and valid and reliable, and in all the ways that those words can be defined, and then providing understandable security, making sure that people are able to get into and log out of the system in a way that is reasonable and doesn't add additional burden that they might try to work around. So with Right staff, we want to know who has visibility to the reasons for changing schedules. So do I want everybody to know that I had to go to the doctor? No. Who has information about that? How is that information used? How is the personally identifiable information about the employees protected? If there are home addresses in that system, who has access to that? That's, can be very dangerous for a situation where one employee may be stalking another employee. If they have access to that information, all of a sudden that employee may not be safe and may have to leave the organization to protect themselves, may have to move. There are all kinds of implications. So really being sure that you're protecting the people and their information is extremely important in that situation, in any situation. And honest and usable is the last area. And this is about value and transparency with the goal of engendering trust, appropriate trust, and explicitly stating that the system is an AI system. So there have been examples of AI systems, answering phones and that sort of thing that sound very, very human. And that certainly is crossing the line to me as far as it needs to identify itself. If it's going to be trustworthy, if it's going to be a system that humans want to interact with, it needs to be honest in that regard, as far as this is not a human, and just helping people set expectations too. So as far as being able to remove bias in data, it's almost impossible. People try to do that, but it's really not possible. Systems that are built on historical data are going to have that history in the system, and you can't take that out. It's not something you can extract typically from a set of data. I see another, California passed a law that systems have to communicate that they're a bot. Excellent, I did not know that. Very cool, glad to hear that. So what we need to do is show the awareness that we have of the known and desirable bias, because we shouldn't be building a system that has unknown or undesirable bias, and acknowledge the issues if there are any issues. Hopefully they're few and far between, but also over communicate. So if a system is being built and it has a weakness, it's not able to determine something, it can't work with a certain set of data, it doesn't have access to an important piece of information. Those kinds of things are important to share with the people using the system. So with regard to rights staff, the system is being built to reduce the known bias that's in the existing data. So we know that the previous managers were always scheduling in a way, not always necessarily, but the common pattern was that they were biased in the way they were scheduling. And so that data would be used to train the system. So we need to make it easy to report the bias or prevent it, or do something to make sure that that particular reason for building the system is really what we build, that's built in a way that prevents that from happening again. So the challenges around all of this are that we need more speculative activities. We need to create more engaging activities, more creative activities, more ways for people to really think through the problems ahead of time. We need to get people engaged in this work, and because it is necessary and hard, much like the work that we do in UX and in accessibility and in many areas, it is often dismissed for a variety of reasons, and we really need people to really get engaged in this work. But that's hard. It's a big challenge, since the AI systems right now aren't really able to fully partner, we need to be thinking about that future, though. Even though it's not happening yet, it will be soon-ish. And we need to be ready for that. And we need to have the tools and the methods ready to really make these systems much better than the current systems are. And the final area is engaging in critical oversight. And so we need to have humans doing this work. Humans have to be doing the oversight, constantly asking, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And who are we doing this for? And making sure that we are honoring the work that we intend to do. And the risks that I've talked about are ever present, and we just need to be proactive about identifying what they are and figuring out how we're going to deal with that particular issue. And identifying the risks that come from the bias in the data, bias in the algorithm choices, bias in the training, bias, from many, many different sources, the misuse and abuse of the systems, and again, those unintended consequences. And because AI systems aren't stable, because they're dynamic and constantly adjusting and changing due to the purpose that they have and the way that they're built, we need to just make sure that humans are really continuously reviewing and testing and evaluating the systems. Jeffrey asks, isn't Amazon's product selection advising system a successful example of an existing system? Oh, I'm not suggesting that there aren't existing systems, but they aren't teaming with us in a deeper way, I guess, is what I'm saying. They certainly are helpful. And certainly I use a smart speaker at home and I love it. It's very helpful. Is it really teaming with me, or is it still just a very smart tool? And the line is blurred, and the line keeps moving between what is AI and what is just nice now. And it's a tough question, but certainly there are lots of good examples of artificial intelligence doing really good work. I haven't seen too many examples where I really felt that the system was teaming in a way that it was independently teaming with a human in doing complex things. Yeah, but if someone has one, I'd love to have you share it. So data transparency. This is the biggest topic with regard to AI systems, making sure that the data is understood at a really deep level, that people really have a clear understanding of where the data came from, its provenance, how and why it was created, what data is included, what data was excluded. And there are existing methods for doing this work, data sheets for data sets and model cards for ML systems. And those are linked here in the presentation. And these really help teams, and likely we will be doing this work unless you have a data scientist working on it, that we would do the work of really examining the data and critiquing it and really understanding what the bias is in that data. And you may wonder if data is biased, like some data isn't. I disagree. I think all data is biased. Here's an example of if you think about a goal of selecting the right lawn care treatment. So you have a lawn care company and they want to build a system to save time so that the people that work out in the field can select the right treatment much more quickly. But they have a lot of different choices for where they're going to get that data. And that's because there are lots of people doing this type of work. So if you think about two data choices, data source choices, you might think of company A primarily using chemicals to treat lawns, and they would have a bias towards chemical use, whereas company B would use only natural treatments, and the data would be biased against chemical use. So both of these are data sources. Both of these have a bias, and neither of them are wrong, but they are biased. There's always a bias in the data. The way we as UX people, yeah, it's hard to be objective. We aren't objective, but that's often, unfortunately, something that people want to be, but we're not. We have a reason for doing the things we do, and that gets into these systems too. So there is bias in the data, there's bias in the selection of the algorithms and the training, all that work. None of it is without a human's involvement, and so all of it is going to be biased. There are systems, deep learning systems, where the system is finding its own patterns, but those are extremely problematic, and I'm not talking about this today. There is unintended and purposeful bias, and then there is, of course, the misuse and abuse. We want to make sure that we understand that inherent bias and the variance that's there, and document as much as we can about the data. And I'll get into this in a little bit more in a few moments, but really thinking about what were the collectors' motivation, how did they compose that information together, what was the process they used, are they reputable themselves, are they a good researcher, or is that organization a respected organization, or is it just a compilation of a bunch of stuff from the internet, which is going to be questionable at best in many cases. So if you think for a moment about the tomato, is it a fruit or is it a vegetable? And we know perhaps scientifically it's a fruit, but many people consider it a vegetable. And depending on who is doing the work of identifying it, they may identify it differently. Just a fun example the linguists, I'm sure, have many more better examples than that. And another example is in image recognition. If you have training data that includes, for example, a red, a green, and a white car, and if the information that is encountered in the environment are indeed red, green, and white cars, your system may be 100% accurate potentially, just super accurate, identifies everything accurately. However, they only know what they're taught. And if they're only taught about these three colors and they actually find that the data in the environment are blue cars, all of a sudden we have a problem. The training data was not representative of, or it wasn't complete and didn't represent the real world experience, the real data that was found. And the system now may not actually recognize these as cars, even though the shape may match. If the system learned the colors instead of the shape of the vehicle, or if it learned some other aspect of that data and you don't know that that's what it learned, you may have built the wrong system and not realize it because you've got such a good match going on until the blue car comes into the scene. So it's, it's really difficult to assume that you have made the right choices with regard to the data that you are using and what you're encountering, unless you really look at it very closely and really question it. So you want to make sure that your system, you understand the bias it has, and you know what it's likely to find in the real world. And I noticed another question. Right staff is not a great example. Good catch, Emily, or I think it's Emily. It's not a great example of a human-machine teaming system. 100% agree. To get into a human-machine teaming system, I felt like it was just too much to try to shove into a presentation. So I wimped out on that. I'm sorry. Another way to think about this, Joy Buolamwini from the Algorithmic Justice League, she recently, there's a movie out, Coded Gaze, which is very good. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. And she describes this really well, that data is a function of our history. All the data that we collect can't be collected in the future. It's historical. It's always going to be about the past. And the past is going to dwell within that data and our algorithms, and it shows us the inequalities that have always been there. And so if you think about, particularly with regard to systems that have been created, for example, to try to remove bias in resumes, Amazon tried to build a tool to do that, and they trained it on existing employees who were considered to be very good employees. And unfortunately, the system learned that resumes that mentioned women's sports or women's colleges were not as high quality as men's because there were so many male individuals in the data. So that was, the system learned that all by itself, but it was perpetuating the situation which already existed in that particular situation where they had very few female individuals in the organization, and therefore training a system on the existing bias was not going to they couldn't overcome that problem. Another example is, unfortunately, people continue to try to deal with criminal activity and recidivism, which is people who unfortunately become imbued in the system, the prison system. And in those situations, the system is built based on the previous reincarceration of individuals who were recidivists, and the bias becomes based on that pattern, which may have darker skin, may come from a Latino background, et cetera. And so the system continues to propagate the racism that was already in the system. So those are just two examples of some of the worst cases of the data from historical racism and other problems being continued because you can't change the past, unfortunately. AI cannot fix our social problems. And representative data is is almost impossible to find, unfortunately, because it contains the bias. It's a very big problem in building AI systems. This is a great list that my colleague Lisa Dance has put together from Services of just helping people to think about the categories of harm that could occur. And it's just a nice way to start to think about, have we considered the financial implications or the health implications, time, fairness and equity, all these different topics. And again, these slides will be posted so you'll have access to this, but it's just another way to question the work that you're doing and really think about the implications. So part of this, of course, is I mentioned, having diverse teams, having people who come from different backgrounds, who have different education experiences, who think in different ways, who are really going to come at the problem from a different perspective. But in order to make a safe place for everyone to be able to communicate, we really need to establish psychological safety so that people understand that we want you to bring your individualness. We want you to question the work that we're doing. We want you to be really thoughtful about this work, but that does require leadership to really buy into this work and to be leading in a way that establishes that safety and to be really embracing of differences and to be inclusive in all the ways that means as well. Good point. Psychological safety is really important with AI as well, because people are afraid of AI. Yes, 100%. It's a huge problem. And it's not a bad problem, honestly. I do not think that fearing it is altogether bad, because we do need to be skeptical, and these systems need to be built in a way that they are not to be feared because they're understood. And that's a big problem in general, because in the field, a lot of people like to make this work very unapproachable. And that's a problem within the field of AI. And we need to make it more approachable. That's not to say everyone's going to understand every algorithm. I certainly don't. But there are ways to talk about the work that are approachable and understandable. And that's an important aspect of this work. So data sheets for data sets, I mentioned already. This really is about finding transparency and clarity about what the data is and really deconstructing it to the point where it is clearly understood exactly what choices were made, how the data was collected, how it has been maintained, what choices were made. And even if you just think of an Excel spreadsheet in the columns, how did you name those columns? How did you organize those columns? Why are they in that order? You make choices. Choices were made about the data, and those choices can easily influence an AI system in ways that you cannot possibly anticipate. And so the more you understand about the data, the more the AI system will be understandable, and the more you'll be able to see what is happening and why, and be able to address problems that are addressable because you have the understanding of the data. Oh yeah, being able to clean data is definitely an important thing. Even in our work, we're constantly working with a lot of data if you're doing research anyway. So auditing is another approach, being able to probe the system with hypothetical cases, really looking for that bias, the brittleness. If there's a shift in context and in distribution, lots of different shifts can happen, and that can change the system dramatically, and being aware of that is important, as well as the access history. So who was using it and when, what were they doing with the system? You need to be careful with ethical considerations here as well, but that information could be very helpful if you're trying to diagnose an issue, and thinking about how that will be managed. Who has access to that is another ethical decision the team will need to make. So lots and lots of challenges here as well. Examining that data and evaluating the dynamic, the data itself being dynamic, as well as the outcomes being dynamic, and just thinking through the potential changes that will come about because of those combinations. Is they're the right data to begin with, and what change? Maybe there's been a change that is right and you want that and it's improving. Why is it improving? Do you really understand what's going on there? Is the system responding appropriately? How can you assess that? How can you understand if it's not, why is it not? Or what steps do you need to take if it's not? Has it been effective as a collaborator? Is it really supporting the human that it's supposed to be doing work with? So if you think about a physical robot that is supposed to, that they're starting to make these systems that you can get into to lift heavy things. Is it collaborating, or is it just doing what's told? And, where's the line between that? And if it's not being as effective as it could be, why is it not? What is missing in that partnership? And is the human willing to give the appropriate amount of trust? To the question about fear earlier, if they are so fearful that they won't give enough trust to make it an effective partnership, if they won't give the system the information it needs, if they won't get into the mechanical system, if they won't use the lane keeping technology in a self-driving car, whatever the example is, then what? And is that system really the system that you intended to build? What can you do to change that? So defining these standards and methods and processes for being able to evaluate the outcomes is the next step. And there's so much work to do in this area. AI has really great potential. I strongly believe that in the future, AIs may be able to be more trusted to potentially even substitute some of our cognition and abilities, maybe. We'll see. I'm pretty optimistic though. But in the meantime, and certainly probably forever, humans must be responsible, particularly for those final decisions that involve a person's life, the use of force, their quality of life, their health and their reputation. And one thing that I find gratifying, the Defense Innovation Board here in the United States had a statement back in 2019 that AI will ensure appropriate human judgment, not replace it. And I continue to believe that that is what we should be doing, that humans really need to be making the important decisions and using their judgment. While imperfect, it is at least a human. It is humane, and hopefully in most cases, and certainly is more likely to consider all of the aspects of a human and the decision being made about them versus a machine that does not understand and can't value our humanness the way we can. So AI is not perfect, and we are not perfect, and we need to just admit that and work forward so that move forward so that the systems that we build are as good as they can be, and at least have been de-risked to the point where they can be reasonably trusted. So think about the time cycles involved in the systems that you're building and how you can build in communication, negotiation, coordination, and what is necessary within each of those interactions, and adopt technical ethics within your team so that you can have these difficult conversations with the framing of a set of shared ethics. And I encourage you to have as many deep conversations as you can, and practice having these conversations, with other UX practitioners if you can, before you work with the whole team. These types of conversations do take practice to become comfortable with them. And particularly if you have a more difficult group of individuals, you'll need to practice managing those conversations appropriately. And then I hope you can activate curiosity and be speculative and imaginative, and do your work in ways that really protect humans, ethical, responsible, transparent, and fair AI systems. And my contact information, and I'm happy to hang out. I don't know how much time we have, but 10 minutes?
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes for the main part of the meeting, and sometimes people stay on after it. So it's really up to you, because I know it's late for you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm good.
Yeah. So we may stay as long as 9:15, I think, depending on how the conversation goes. So folks, jump in, challenge Carol, ask hard questions. And I believe in wait time. You know wait time, right?
Brandel, did you have something?
Yes, if nobody else is going to jump in, thank you for the talk. Really exciting to hear this discussion. One thing that I'm curious about is, it sounded like you were, your presentation sort of description of AI was fairly substantially sort of agentive AI, in the sense of being presented as an entity, as an agent that sort of is acting sort of separately and identifiably. Is that a fair characterization? I know that there are various people who, because AI can take so many different forms in terms of the way that it's presented. So Apple Photos is AI, but it doesn't have any sort of discernible agentiveness to it. What is your stance on on where it is appropriate and where it's not appropriate for that agentive kind of presentation? And what impact does that have sort of psychically on the participants and the users of the systems?
Yeah, no, it depends. Let's get it out of the way. Yeah, it really, it's a broad question. I do, it's so hard to pick a particular, did you have a particular situation in mind?
No, actually, I was thinking I watched a talk recently by Daniel Dennett where he was completely opposed to agentive AI in all forms. And I thought that was a really interesting line to draw, to say you have to make it so that people are ultimately completely aware that they are the sole arbiter of decisions and responsibilities within a system. And yeah.
So there's a train going by, and I'm going to mute for 1 sec. Oh, I might get to say, no. Can you hear okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Tell me if I have to turn it off because it gets loud. It goes right under my building. It'll just take a second. Okay.
See, we never would have gotten that if you had been here in the Bay Area and not in Pittsburgh. So I appreciate the local color.
That's my train. Yeah, so it just depends. So I am not I'm not that hardlined as far as that particular generalization. However, certainly, as I mentioned many times, when there are final important decisions with regard to human life, the way of life, the healthcare, anything along those lines, any important decisions, a human must maintain that ability to make that decision. And I do also, an AI system, people need to be aware that they're dealing with a computer. If they're aware that they're dealing with a computer, in some cases that's enough. Like, do I need to know it's an AI or not? Like if I'm aware it's a computer, I think that's good enough in most cases. So I don't know if that quite answers your question. Okay.
I want to recognize Suyash Joshi and then Ted Selker. Suyash, come off of mute. Almost there. Yeah, hi.
So my question is around like your point about like AI. Like I think this previous question or the answer answered my question, but I'll ask it.
Yeah.
So when do you think the AI should like fully be in control? Because like I think of like, if there were be a future where robots would cook for you, do the dishes, do all the stuff that we don't like to do. I do not want to be in control of that. I would be happy to delegate that type of work to a robot. So,
Yeah.
where does AI is completely autonomous and good, and where do humans need to jump in?
Yeah, so it depends. So I recently was, sorry, I know. See, the age-old cop-out. I was recently diagnosed with many allergies. And so one of the obvious solutions is cleaning more. And, of course, get one of those little, autonomous little vacuum cleaners. Except I'm also not the most organized person on the planet because I also have ADHD, which probably is not entirely to blame for my mess. But I have kids and cats, and one of the reasons I decided not to get one of those is because it would require significant changes to my lifestyle. So for me, that's not a good option. For someone else, they would be able to schedule perhaps when that works, and that would be great. So it's going to depend. Different people are going to need to create situations that they are comfortable with. And I think that is the key. So with regard to safety, It also depends, but like with the vehicles that are currently on the road that do lane keeping, for example, if I was able to turn that off because I did not like lane keeping, and then my husband got in the car, it better be extremely clear that I have turned off lane keeping so that he knows that if he starts driving and wants that, he turns it on. Like the explicitness of those communications of that status, that mode needs to be very clear in that type of situation versus if the vacuum starts and it runs into a box I left on the floor because I haven't done the recycling yet, yeah, not a big deal. And so, you know, it's going to be very dependent on the situation, on how integral that system is to whatever the situation is and the general context. What if I usually have it going in the middle of the night, but tonight I stayed up till 2 a.m. and I've got a bunch of friends over and the robot's running around, what is going on? Like, being able to just pick it up and put it back or send it home or, you know, however, through the app, whatever it is, making sure that the human does have that kind of control is the important piece. And thinking about those situations that are outliers is really important. So another quick example in self-driving, 5 years ago, it looked like it was right around the corner and I was able to do research, and one of the research participants who showed up unannounced did not have sight. He was blind. And I wasn't prepared for that, but it was one of the best studies I've ever done. Forced me to think on my feet. And also I learned a huge amount about his expectations for being able to move around and the freedom it would give him and the ways that he would be able to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it without anyone knowing, without anyone asking, without anyone judging. If I want to go to the bar at 1 a.m., I'm going to the bar at 1 a.m. You know, whatever it is, taking the human out in that situation was empowering. So it depends.
Ted.
Yeah, I love that example. And I guess I want to go back to, I have a basic question, but I want to start with a specific example of it. So the lane changing one, I'd like, to think, how would I actually know if it's on or off?
Right.
And so a good, I can think of lots of ways of like for example, on the glove compartment, it says the airbag is on.
Right.
So just an example of that, but the question I was hoping to ask, and you can answer that one as part of it maybe, is I love hearing examples. You've got these principles, and these principles either came to you in the middle of the night or they came to you based on a lot of experiences you've had or just listening to other people. But I bet you have a couple of experiences, maybe an experiment you ran like the one on the cars, which taught you one of these principles, and maybe you could take us through where one of those was a big surprise to you, or really was emblematic.
Yeah. So so to give you some background on there was a paper that I used that I wrote that is how I developed those 4 ideas, which is how that got to the checklist. And I did that by looking at many sets of existing ethics and reviewing lots and lots of other papers and other things. So that was more of a desk research thing than life experience necessarily. But through that process of learning about the ways that people were interacting with systems in negative ways was really surprising me. All of it was really surprising to me. I used to really look forward to having a sentient robot right here would be awesome, who could be, responding to all those emails while I'm doing this, or whatever. And the more I know and the more excited I am about AI, the less I want that. Because of the implications that brings. If it's sentient, does it have rights? Does it have responsibilities outside of what I want it to do? What if it doesn't want to do my emails? Like all of a sudden it's not it's not a machine anymore. It's another being, and that's a whole mess I don't want to get into. So that's probably the biggest thing, which then, by backing that up, okay, so where is that line? And how do we better talk about that in ways that is going to be more explicit to the people interacting with these systems, and what those limitations are too. But when, again, 5 years ago, self-driving was around the corner, as far as I could tell, it isn't and won't be for a very long time at this point. But the signals that were being displayed and the conversations that were being had were very much about things changing rapidly. And so that's also been a big realization, is that we need guidance for now, because the systems aren't that good right now and won't be for a very long time. And so we can't wait 10, 20, 30 years to see what happens with AI. We've got to work with the here and now, which is this weird, mucky middle ground where there are semi-autonomous vehicles on the streets, and so are we. And how do I, when I'm crossing the street, know that that vehicle sees me? How is it going to communicate with me? How is it going to communicate with another vehicle? How, if I'm a passenger, do I know it saw that bicyclist or that little kid that just ran across the street? How do you give that that sense of understanding, that sense of awareness, context to the people who have to interact with these systems? I can keep talking, but I won't.
Thank you.
Next question, or did that help?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've hit the witching hour. I'd be happy to stay if other people have provocative comments for Carol. And if not, we'll say thank you so much, Carol Smith, for coming to talk with us at BayChi from Pittsburgh, and the home of Three Rivers Crossing. I know about that. And I want to remind everybody that this talk, and you can share with your friends, will be up and posted probably in the next 2 days, and the slides as well. And we'll be very happy to see you next month, when we're going to hear from Ted Nelson. And I was going to look up if he had spoken at BayChi before, and I think he has, but it hasn't been for more than 10 years. So this is going to be very fun to hear from him. And Carol, we'd welcome you back in the audience if you'd like to show up.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, that's it. I'm calling it. And thank you for showing up for BayChi tonight in July. We'll see you next month.
Take care.
Bye-bye.